my privilege to be able to introduce Pastor Hugh today, a man who really almost needs no introduction in this congregation. I think, other than maybe Ralph Braun, nobody has been a guest speaker here more times than Hugh Crowder. Pastor I grew up with in my childhood in Seattle, Washington. He was the pastor of Lakeland Bible Church from 1970 until just last year, until 2010. Is that right? Around New Year's. At the start of this year, Tenny Sysons took over, and a young man now taking over Lakeland Bible Church. We're excited about that. And Hugh has not been goofing off since last year. He's been very busy in this year, and so I'm eager for him to share with us the direction his ministry has gone, what God is doing with him, and to give us a word of encouragement here today. Hugh, please bring us the word.
Bob knows where the secret button is. Bob, thank you for having us and inviting us, and congregation, thank you for putting up with us. There were some who left right after the first class. I think they found out I was going to be here. And so the rest of you, I will do my best to test your patience to the maximum. Just consider it a privilege to have that actually happen. Last year, about this time, I was going through a lot of troubling with regard to whether or not I was making the correct decision, when actually, probably I made that decision 40 years ago. I wanted to do nothing but do evangelism because I was disturbed about what people were thinking evangelism was and what evangelists do. Most of them don't seem to do evangelism like that we think they ought to do, and so evangelists at large had a very strange reputation, and I didn't like that, so I just didn't want to have anything to do with the evangelism, so I did my own evangelism. And I wouldn't invite them to come to my church because basically the first thing they talked about was money. And we didn't have any, and we never did have any. And I often said to God, you know, give me the money, and I'll have this great evangelist, and we'll have this great church. And the money never came, and I never figured out that that was in God's wisdom, okay? And then I wanted to be an evangelist, and it never would work out, it seemed like. I'd get invited maybe once a year to go do evangelism somewhere. And I'd say, you know, Father, I want to do more evangelism, more evangelism, more evangelism. Please give me those opportunities. Didn't come. And you say, well, why don't you give up? You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Well, sometimes I've almost bartered on saying the definition of praying might be that, or praying wrong might actually be that. But I didn't, and I wouldn't dare go that particular direction. And don't any of you say, well, Pastor Crowder said it, so I'll try it. It doesn't work that way. Pastor Crowder might jump off a cliff, but that doesn't mean anything. He's crazy already, see? He started out that way. But I couldn't figure out for 40 years why, you know, from the very beginning of becoming a believer, I wanted to be an evangelist. And as a I was telling someone earlier today that I've known Bob a long time, and then they began to kind of figure out in their head, I could see it happening, how old is this guy? And, but I was a teenage preacher right out of the chute as a new believer. That's dangerous. Don't allow that to happen. But we did anyway, and there were about 9 of us that were all saved in our teens. And we were called the boy preachers. And we had a good reputation, somewhat. And I did tent revivals, and I was invited to do youth ministries, and my head kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger because that we were popular for doing that. And even last week, I was with a couple of young men, and we attended their church, and they brought it up again and told the church that we were working together at one time. One was our music guy and the other was a soloist. And we had all of those accoutrements of evangelism, we seemed like. And I thought, man, this is it. I'm going to be an evangelist. I didn't even think about other famous evangelists. I thought about myself as such. And so for 40 years, I wanted to be an evangelist, and it seemed like, I don't want to say it this way, but it seemed like that God didn't want me to be one, or the opportunity didn't occur. And I finally figured it out, I think. And remember, we qualify almost everything we say because what happened? All the time that I was a pastor, I was complaining that Christians in the pew don't know anything and they need to be taught. And it's our job to teach them. It's our job to teach them. And I think sometimes wanting to be an evangelist was to escape that responsibility. But I love the teaching. I love to get involved in doing verse-by-verse study and categorical study, and watching people actually grow, and having people to get up in our church and say, I'm so glad I found this church because I didn't start growing until I came here. And I thought, man, that's the crowning work. And so eventually, and some of you were part of that experiment, I started combining it. And when was it? It was the year of Katrina, right? What was that? 2007? I forget. Anyway, it was back there at that time. And Bob invited me to come. And I said, what I want to do is I want to come and I want to talk about true evangelism. Some of you were here and some of you remembered that. And it was relatively successful, and I was invited and had been invited earlier to go to other churches and do exactly the same thing, and I started making up a workbook and all of that. Well, I already knew about Larry Marrier and Evantel. Evantel is a Dallas-based parish church evangelistic organization that's really well put together, extremely slick. And I have some of their material here today for those of you who are not familiar with it. Some of you have been through the Evantel training. We've been here twice, right? To do that training? Yes. Twice, and we did it over in the old building. Anybody remember from over there? Right, okay. I've probably done somewhere in the neighborhood since 2007, 3 or 4 dozen of those particular types of training. And we also have it ongoing at our church. It's regularly scheduled in Washington. We're making headway. Next week, some of the things that I've been doing, Bob wants me to talk about, and so I'll kind of weave that in here. Next month, actually, I'll be going to Redding, California, and we have a kind of an open campaign plan for anybody from any church that wants to be there for specific training, very similar to what I've done here. But also, we're experimenting with the idea of taking over for a week. We will have the evangelism class at Shasta Bible College, which is headquartered in Redding, California, and the president and the professors that handle that particular department have invited us to come, and we will actually have the evangelistic students, and we will be training them in the evangelism methods. Now, how did I get involved in doing this? Well, wanting to be an evangelist, wanting to be interested in the things of evangelism, and watching how evangelism was to go, I discovered that Larry Marrier, who was at that time that I first discovered it, he was an adjunct professor at Dallas Seminary, and I knew that, and I never had classes with him or anything, but I studied, I read his books, and I read books that he recommended, and then I began to realize that I had skewed my thinking and moved my thinking to where it was like his. It was grace evangelism, it was non-pressure evangelism, it was simple method evangelism, it was evangelism in the simplest common denominator form. And I recognized that that's what the Scripture had, and it was unencumbered with gimmicks. It was uncovered with various things that to me were not fitting for evangelism. And Larry Martyrs' attitude and all that was such. And so what I did was, it took me a while to sort of figure out which would be the best way to do it, and it turned out to be the worst way, but it worked the best way, okay? Does that ever happen to you? And it's got to happen every once in a while. Well, I called up the Evantel offices, and I said that I needed to have some questions answered. And they said, well, we'll do what we can. And a very nice lady got on the phone, very tactful, very patient, not knowing any idea who I was. And I didn't tell her, well, you know, this is Dr. Crowder and all that. Because, you know, when you start talking like that, people sort of back away into a corner and they don't know what to think. And, but I told her my name, and I told her that I was interested in getting permission to use some copyrighted material they had. Now, I thought that was genius. That I had thought up an approach to be able to have them talk to me. And so I said that, and she said in a very disarming way, she said, why do you want to do that? Well, I hadn't thought through that far. I knew why. I thought everybody knew why. And so I said, I have written some material and to use for evangelism, and I would like to publish some of it, but I need permission because I'm going to draw from that. And she said, why do you want to do that? Another question I hadn't anticipated. And I've been complimented by lawyers in court that I can anticipate their questions. Of course, that's easy once you understand lawyers. But I wasn't understanding the disarming approach to this particular woman, so I was a little flabbergasted. And she said to me, can you come to Dallas? And I said, certainly. Now, she had no earthly idea that we're 2,300 miles away from Dallas. And I wasn't going to tell her it's 2,300 miles or that it was very inconvenient for me there. And I said, when do you want me there? And she said, can you come next Tuesday? All right, this was Thursday, and I said, sure. And thanks to jet airplanes and credit cards and things like that, I wound up Monday night being in Dallas. And the Dallas Cowboys were playing a football team, and I almost missed my ride because I was watching it on the television monitors in the Dallas airport. But anyway, I went and they walked me through their program. And it was wonderful, just spending time and being relaxed by them and disarmed. There was a tremendous amount of rapport that was established. They were as interested in me as I thought I was in them. And I was really happy about that. And then at the end they said, you can use our material any way that you want to. Well, for a plagiarizer, that's a dream. Because I said, you don't know what you're saying. And they said, it's okay, we'll keep an eye on you. Well, what they did is they trained me to use their methods, and they already had about 150 people they trained that way. And they told me I could do it anywhere in the world, and I said, Africa, yes, China, yes, India, yes. And so we've been able to go to all of those places and actually be involved in doing their training as we moved along in this. Well, they gave me that permission. Well, the first year, I think I was here once in that first year, and altogether, I think the records indicate that I trained about 700 people. And I found out from them, I didn't know this or my head would have blown off my head, you know, it would have exploded, but no one had ever done that. And I didn't know any better. And so I'm going around to churches and I'd ask pastors, and there were pastors that taught me a lot about what we were doing wrong, or what I had been doing wrong, and probably other evangelists.